I guess I'll represent the people of West Linn.
How about the Planning Commission?
Oh, that too.
How about Darren? Gustav?
Hi, Darren Gustorf with Icon Construction, representing the development community.
Greg?
Yeah, Greg DiLoretto with the Transportation Advisory Board.
Kim?
Kim Bria with the Sustainability Advisory Board.
Chris?
Chris Myers, City of West Linn, City Planner, City of West Linn.
Roy?
Roy Bielostowski from the City Council.
Scott?
Scott Irwin with the Planning Commission, as well as the HRB.
Shannon? With Shannon Knight.
Yeah, I was going to say with the Shannon Knight represents CCI and the EDC.
Okay, now Shannon with an O, who just left. We'll come back to her. Oh, there she is.
I was handing off a bearded dragon to my daughter, who's babysitting. Shannon Eilis with the West Linn EDC and the West Linn Alliance.
Tom?
Tom Watton, Historical Review Board.
Vicki Olson?
Vicki Olson, CCI.
JJ?
JJ Porlock, Toll Brothers.
Darren Wise?
All right, Darren Wise, planning manager for the city and the liaison to this working group. Thank you.
Kim, I already mentioned you, Kim. Anybody I'm missing? All right, well, let's open it up a little bit and we'll turn it over to Darren Weiss for the role of the work, the purpose, and the meeting. Then we'll move on from there.
All right, thanks, Jim. Yeah, so just always want to remind the group what your purpose is. And again, a recommendation on House Bill 2001 code amendments, which the group successfully did in April. I'll give you a quick update on that. In my email and the memo, I said that council had approved the first reading of the ordinance incorporating the working group's recommendation. Council passed the second reading last night. So the House Bill 2001 code amendment package included all of the recommendations from the working group. So great job on that, everyone, and congratulations on getting your hard work recognized by the council. So again, that was the first goal. Second, clear objective standards. Third, Chapter 96 street improvements, which you're here tonight to make a recommendation on the Chapter 96 amendments. And then the meeting guidelines that we all agreed on back in February are also included in your packet. So that's my quick say on that, Jim. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody have a correction or anything they want to make on the meeting review of what from the summary notes from the discussion of last month?
I do. This is Shannon Knight. I just want to say that there was a comment that I made on there that I was asking, what is the difference between an ADU, someone calling it an ADU or duplex, like could they just call it a ADU instead of a duplex to avoid having to do the street improvements? And that was my question, and it wasn't kind of really reflected that way in the meeting.
Okay, duly noted. Anybody else? And somebody came on at 5032. That's a phone number. Who is that, may I ask?
That's Carrie Pellet. Jim, how are you?
Carrie.
Hi.
And you're representing who?
Oh, I'm just an alternate.
Okay. Alrighty. So does anybody else have any questions on that? They seeing none. Well, let's turn this over to Chris. And who's going to go through the Chapter 96 discussion? Whatnot.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. And thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time for being here. So as you may recall, we are discussing and working on the Chapter 96 code amendments package.
Sorry, point of order. Do apologize there, Chris. Should we take a quick vote to approve the minutes from the last meeting then?
I guess we should. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, now we can go on. Thank you, Scott, for keeping us online.
Thanks, Scott. Excuse me. Okay, so as you recall, yeah, Chapter 96 code amendments. We're working on street improvements. Chapter 96 is street improvements in construction. We've broken it out, as you may recall, in basically two categories: residential construction and commercial construction. In the memo that was part of your packet, we did a little bit of I did a little bit of a recap, and as part of that packet, there are two different options with some new code language. Before we get to that, I just wanted to kind of touch base on that memo, make sure that my memory and my recap is accurate. In residential construction, as a working group, it looks, I have it written that it was agreed that construction of an accessory dwelling unit should not require street improvements. That seemed to be the group direction, and also that members agreed that new residential construction should have the option of a waiver of street improvements and a fee in lieu. And we'll get into the question we have to discuss here in a few minutes. Then in commercial construction from last time, members discussed that street improvements for commercial construction, the only recommended change we had was that under certain circumstances, waiver of the street improvements and fee in lieu would be allowed for new commercial construction or the remodel of existing commercial building. So if you recall, we went through the tables and we didn't have a lot of changes. Primary question still to be resolved is that we do have two versions of new code language, which I sent to you in the packet. There's option 1 and option 2. The primary differences in those options are, pull them over. So, option 1 is allowing a fee in lieu, but with a specific set of criteria. We've taken a stab at writing out what that criteria would look like. Option 2 is allowing fee in lieu, but utilizing a map, which we don't obviously have a map at this time. So those are the two sort of fundamental differences right now in the new code language. They primarily they are the same, aside from 96.020 fee in lieu, as you can see on both of those options. So that's really where we're at. That's the question that we need to ask. Before we dig in, I want to do a couple things. I think I may have confused some people. We had a couple people reach out to us regarding the 1,320 feet measurement that I used. And I used the terminology walk shed, which, my apologies, because that's part of my background in transportation planning is things like walking sheds. So let me just back up a little and try and re-explain that, because there was more than a couple people had questions. So essentially 1,320 feet, not essentially, 1,320 feet is 1/4 of a mile. And 1/4 of a mile has been shown over many studies over many years that is roughly the distance that individuals are comfortable walking to get to any one space, whether it be a bus stop, a transit stop, a park, etc. So a walk shed just shows the distance that people are willing to travel via foot. And so 1,320 feet is sort of that barrier, that moment where people feel that it's too far to comfortably walk regularly. So we're using 1,320 feet in option 1, under 96.020 fee in lieu. We've used 1,320 feet, or 1/4 of a mile, which I will change or at least put in there 1/4 of a mile so people understand what I'm getting at, as the distance in some of the criteria that we've listed. So I just wanted to clarify where I got 1,320 feet from and what that is. So having said that, the other comment I was going to add in here, when we've discussed a map, which I think theoretically a map of areas in which we would allow a fee in lieu, the map certainly has some benefits, some visual reference and whatnot. The challenge with creating a map is the cost and the length of time that it will take to come up with said map. And I know Darren's listening, and if he wants to jump in, certainly feel free. Darren Wise, that is. Darren Gustor, you just sit there and wear that hat. I got to pick every once in a while. The problem with the map is creating a map where something will or will not be allowed is going to be a very time-consuming process. Certainly be costly. There would be a lot of outreach to citizens, open houses, some consulting would need to happen, working with the neighborhood associations, because we're essentially making a decision on where in the city you can or can't do something. So that's going to need to be a very deep and extensive process. It would also theoretically need to be updated. I don't know how often, every 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I'm not sure what the number would be. So I just wanted to be really clear about that map. It's not that I'm not saying it shouldn't be something we do or that it should be something we do. I just want you to understand that we can't simply just suddenly draw a map and put on here that you can or can't do something and that would be fine. So that's just something you guys should at least consider. And with that, I would open it up for some discussion. I do know actually, I think it was Greg, you had asked about, maybe it was something like the legality of collecting a fee in lieu, but using it somewhere else, not on the property that it was collected from. I think that was Greg who had asked that question. And actually, Darren has been in communication with our attorney about that. Darren, do you want to just throw that into conversation now, or do you want to wait on that? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, sure. So I believe Greg, it was a two-part question. One, whether or not we can legally accept fee in lieu, and then if we do, can we legally utilize the fee in lieu in some other part of the city? I believe was the two-prong question. So yeah, I spoke with the city attorney. One, yes, it's legally defensible to accept a fee in lieu and a fee in lieu of the improvements. So that's a yes. And then secondly, the city attorney recommends that the city would set up a sort of a policy guidance. It's typically done through a resolution with the city council that if a fee in lieu is used for a project, that there will always be funds available to finish a project that it paid into the fee in lieu. So essentially, so property A pays a fee in lieu, but that some of that money is used on property B. At some point, there would be enough funds in the fee in lieu pot of money to fund property A. So it would just be a sort of a policy guidance document, and the city attorney said that different jurisdictions approach it in different ways, but as long as you can show that there's always going to be influx of money into the fund that would then be able to be used to fund that specific location. So again, it's outside of what we're asking this group to do, but it's something that we will definitely have to work with the city attorney's office on to get that set up in order for all of this to come together at the same time. So does that answer your question, Greg?
Yeah, and my question actually kind of went away when I saw the ordinance you wrote, because it doesn't even refer to putting the money in a pot of and sending it somewhere else. And so what we're being asked to look at is, but yes, you answered my question. Thank you.
Anybody else have something they want to add or questions? Scott, is your hand up?
Yeah. So I was curious, Chris. I mean, so we're not saying where the money goes. You're saying fee in lieu. So instead of there being a sidewalk and curb in front of my house, I'm just gonna pay some money to the city and it goes into the general fund. And then someone might say to themselves, you know, I'd rather have a sidewalk and curb in front of my house and know that I'm getting some benefit directly instead of this money just going to the general fund to go towards whatever. I mean, are we going to? I mean, I'm not sure if something we can put in the code regarding this, or before I had suggested that the funds would be directed toward making sure that we are creating routes to schools, to parks and public transportation. I forgot who on the group has mentioned that there. I think it was Vicky said there's $11 million worth of projects, and we only have $1 million to pay for those that have already been lined up. So I appreciate a little follow through on that.
Yeah, Scott, those are good questions and points. Yeah, this particular, the space we're at right now is simply getting the code actually changed to allow things like a fee in lieu in cases where it isn't allowed right now. The long-term goal is that we don't want the money just to go into the general fund for use for whatever is we want it to go toward community good, which would be theoretically building sidewalks in places where we need them, like a safe routes to school type program. Or, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, we don't want it to be used just for that, but council is going to need to make some of those decisions on the policies on how that works. That requires finance, engineering, etc. I want to be clear too, in speaking to someone from the group who had some questions in the last couple days. I think it was Vicky and I may have spoken about this. It's not a discounted rate. The rate that someone would pay the fee in lieu is the amount of money it costs to build that sidewalk or that that curb gutter and sidewalk. It's not a discount. You're just not having to go through the process of building it out and constructing those street improvements. And we don't know exactly how that would look, but it does look, in speaking with the city engineer, that he'd like to tie it to, at least in conversations now, he'd like to tie it to the city of Portland does an annual update of the payroll costs, the material costs, the construction costs of building street improvements, and he'd like to tie it to that and make it part of our, whether it be in the fee schedule or just in the municipal code. So it would be a relatively current and accurate number that would be fluctuating year to year. So I hope that answered your questions, Scott, Commissioner Irwin. And if not, please speak up.
Anybody else?
So this is Darren Wise, just to follow up on what Chris just mentioned. So, Commissioner Irwin, so one, it would go to a specific pot of money. So we would legally have to do that. If we're collecting a fee in lieu, we can't just use that for some other operation. So we would legally have to set up that pot of money. So then it can be utilized for that specific use in the future. And then secondly, this fee in lieu is set up as an option. So for instance, Scott, if you build a new house and then you don't meet that criteria of having to put in the street improvements and you could do the fee in lieu instead, you could still put in the street improvements. It's your option. We're just responding to what we've heard from the community, that some of the community doesn't like when a sidewalk is put in on a street that has no other sidewalks anywhere to be found. And people think that there's a better use of that, putting it into a pot of money and then using that money to build sidewalks where, there are gaps or important, like safe routes to schools, important connections that need to be made. So, all right, appreciate it.
Greg?
Hey, Darren, you said that the money has to be available to complete. Suppose property A decides they don't want to do it, they do a fee in lieu of, and at some point along, the city comes along and makes the other properties next to it, and they go to do A. once you've paid, you don't have to pay more if it turns out it's 5 years down the line and the project costs a lot more than what they put in 5 years ago, right? You wouldn't have to pony up additional money. Is that true or
That
false?
is, that's correct, Greg. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'd already paid your fair share.
And I guess since I'm kind of in favor of the 1300, or at least of the one where we actually spell out where you have to do it and where you don't, as opposed to the map, particularly given the difficulties of the map. Having worked for city government in the past, I know how difficult those things can be. So the clearer you can make something, the easier it is as a staff person to administer it. And so I don't know if 1320 is right. I don't have any problems with it, but I kind of approve. Is that option one? I kind of support option one.
Thanks, Greg. And I think that's just one comment. I may have brought it up last time. The struggle that Oregon City has had. They have a fee in lieu program, but they've written it into their code that it's required to be spent only on that property. So if the city's not ready to build out the remainder of the street improvements nearby, the money just sits in a specific spot or pot for that property. Well, you brought up a great point. Construction costs obviously go up. Lately, they've gone up a lot, but they go up over the years. So 10 years later, if you come back to do some street improvements in that area, what that property paid in is probably a fraction of what it actually cost to build out. They're kind of stuck in that regard because they can't spend the money somewhere else. Darren's saying is we would be able to spend it elsewhere as long as that pot of money still has money for that property. That bank account has money for that property.
I'd kind of like to add a little bit then, apparently if nobody else is on. I feel that the number 2 position is going to take additional city staff. And right now our city staff is down considerably from what it needs to be. And we don't have the staff to do something like that, which would cost us to bring in a consultant, which should be thousands of dollars and whatnot. Is it really worth it when, if we look down the street a quarter of a mile or 1,320 feet, and there's no sidewalks anywhere in that period of time or period of space, then that's when we accept the fee in lieu. But if there is a sidewalk already being, like if Icon comes up and builds, houses, and they put in sidewalks in front of their houses, and it's within the 1,320 square feet or a quarter of a mile, then you are required then at that point, as I understand it, that you would also have to put in sidewalks. Is that correct? And then Kim after that. Chris or Darren?
Yes, sorry, my microphone didn't want to turn back on. Yeah, I think you got that right, Jim. You got that right.
Hey, Kim?
I had a question on the map side because I totally hear that. That's a big lift. But I've got the city GIS website up, and it's handy when you know where to look for the layers, but it's got the tax lot layer on. Does the city have layers for the sidewalks? Because it has a pretty decent measuring tool. And I think to me, the important thing is that an owner or developer can ask those questions themselves. So if they're reading this, that they can use the measuring tool quick and see on the map where those sidewalks are. That may be useful, but I'm not seeing a layer on the GIS for where sidewalks are actually built.
We don't have a layer, a sidewalk layer as part of that program. We do have an inventory in the transportation system plan from 2016 that shows a map of sidewalks, and I believe there's some priority given to certain, like Salama was a priority sidewalk project. So it does, if I recall correctly, give a little bit of a priority to where some of those sidewalks are. But no, that would be another step to that process, right? Is to have an actual current sidewalk inventory.
For Charlie?
Chris, on this fee in lieu, who will come up? I'm sure it would be somebody in the city, but who will come up with what that would be for each individual house that merits fee in lieu as opposed to actually paying to construct the the sidewalk and the green strip and the gutters, what have you. It can't be one size fits all. If you got a big piece of property, the fee in lieu would have to be more, I would presume, than a smaller piece. Is that correct?
Yeah, so and actually, Darren or JJ might even be able to speak to this a little bit. So basically what's common practice is you come up with a number per linear foot, but it also depends on what you're building. So if you actually have to do curb, gutter, sidewalk, drainage, pavement, it's obviously going to be a much bigger lift than it's simply putting in a sidewalk, a curb tight sidewalk. So it really depends on what needs to be done to complete the half street improvements. And I think, Charlie, you bring up a good point, or Commissioner Matthews, you bring up a good point. Some of the older neighborhoods where we don't have sidewalks, where citizens have been very, very, very clear, vocal and clear that they don't want sidewalks, Robinwood, Cedar Oak, I'm looking at you. Those streets are substandard. So, you know, a 20-foot street with no sidewalks has quite a bit of half street improvements to get to code, to get to standard. So it would be more. Whereas maybe somewhere, I can't think of anywhere off the top of my head, maybe somewhere on Upper Mid Hill, bad example, sorry, Jim, somewhere up on Upper Mid Hill simply needs a 6-foot curb tight sidewalk. So I think we're talking about, there's a couple different things that a particular, a development might need, and that would be determined by what's been built out around it.
Well,
Did that help?
Well, I guess I can see a controversy brewing between a new homeowner and whatever the estimate is that the fee in lieu would be. And I don't know if this is the point that we should have some definition for that in what we're going to recommend. Or, I mean, it to me, that's kind of a big question mark that's hanging out there on how do we establish, based upon, obviously based upon the conditions in the neighborhood, that's the reason we do the fee in lieu to be consistent with the rest of the homeowners. But anyway, I just don't know if there's some standard that we should establish, or that it's just left up to each time for the city to come up with, okay, this should be X amount of money.
So I appreciate that comment, and we actually do have a standard. We have both engineering and municipal code standards as well as the community development code. Those are the standards for what needs to be built. And what we're talking about in fee in lieu is if your house just happened to have an appropriately sized street but didn't have a sidewalk, then your fee in lieu would be for the sidewalk, not the half street, not the pavement, not the drainage. But we do have standards already in place that our engineering and public works staff utilize, and the community development code expresses, where those are, what and where those need to be. So all we're asking here is, are we
So
good
technically, in those neighborhoods that right now don't have sidewalks, don't want sidewalks, don't want gutters, the fee in lieu could almost be zero, right?
No, in fact, the fee in lieu would probably be more in those instances because they literally have substandard streets. They need pavement. They need to widen the street by 4.5 feet. They need to put in the curb, gutter, drainage, and sidewalk.
Okay, cool.
It'd be the neighborhoods more like where you live, Commissioner, or I don't know your house. I just know the general area of where you live. We're not that far apart, actually. I don't think. If you just were missing your sidewalk, your fee in lieu would be less because your street is wide enough already. You don't need to repave half your street. It's already built out. It's just that sidewalk. But again, and maybe up in Jim's hood, where Upper Mid Hill is very narrow, his half street improvement might be 5 or 6 feet of street, then the curb, gutter, then the sidewalk, as well as the drainage. His would be more. So the more developed you already are, the less your fee in lieu would be. Did that help?
Yep, thanks.
And JJ and Darren, are you okay with that? How I just expressed that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Darren. Okay. I'll get back to you, Scott, in a minute. Go ahead, Darren.
I think I just add, I think Commissioner Matthews was trying to also touch on how it's valued. So I know I can kind of walk you through the process that's currently in place now. We're looking at a piece of property, or say it's a property owner that wants to develop or redevelop their property. Starts at a pre-app level. So we meet with the city staff, and staff will tell us what the design standards are that need to be met for the improvement. And with that, once it's defined with, well, your street, because we don't always see, we can't tell what the subgrade is of a street. Engineering will come to that meeting and explain that the street is substandard, you're gonna need sidewalks, you're gonna need curb and gutter, and then it's defined at that level of the amount of improvements that need to happen. At that point, if fee and lieu is an option and in place, similar to the permitting process, and maybe, and Chris and Darren, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if this is where you're going with valuation, but we would hire our engineer of record would take the plan, so to speak, the paper plans of what needs to be improved and run quantities and current pricing and vet the cost. If we were to actually build it, that's good for the developer to see what the improvement's actually going to cost. And it's good for the city to see what it would cost. Now, the city then does their own review and they go, well, that's accurate, that's not, this seems off. So there's a bit of back and forth on what current costs are, because they are evolving, and they have gone up substantially in the last couple of years. Once that price is signed off and approved by city staff, then the developer has the option to either pay the in lieu or actually do the improvement. And it needs to be fair, because if, we're a business, and if a fee in lieu is a boilerplate calculation that the city implements, but the arithmetic comes out twice as much as what the actual improvement would cost, we're gonna put in the improvement. It doesn't make sense to, it makes sense to punt the improvement if there's no contiguous sidewalks in the area. We've always felt like it's a waste of resources to build an improvement when it doesn't make sense in the area. So we're in full support of where the city's going with this, but they have to align. There has to be an agreement that this is the true cost of what it is. And it has to be, it's never going to be exact, but it has to be really close, or, a developer or property owner is going to make the decision on what's the most financially efficient for themselves. And sometimes that won't equate to the best result for the city. And I hope I answered or explained at least the valuation piece.
No, thanks.
Yeah, and I think before Commissioner Irwin jumps in, I think I just wanted to comment on what Darren had just said. Yeah, I think the other, and thank you for that perspective. I think the other thing is not everyone's Toll Brothers or Icon, right? I mean, it could just be, Jim Farrell bought a property and he wants to build a nice new house on it, and he isn't a developer that has an engineering staff. So we are looking, and Lance Calvert, wow, almost forgot his name, our city engineer, in discussions with Lance, has expressed that he has done his research. He's looked around at what others do, and he likes the way Portland does an annual review of those costs and have come up with a per linear foot cost. Now that cost would obviously vary. Is it just a sidewalk you need? Is it full half street improvements, drainage, curb gutters? So what we're trying to get to is, yeah, Darren or JJ with where they have staff and engineers and consultants and this and that, they may be able to go in and analyze that, but we also don't want to put that burden on Jim and his new property that he wants to build his really awesome home on. And so we can come up with we can utilize what we think is an accurate per linear foot number that would change annually as costs change, as the economy and the development world fluctuates. So you wouldn't necessarily have to do what Darren's talking about. However, those who could do that as well. So I hope I was clear in that. I don't think I explained that very well, but we're just trying to come up with a number that's fair, as Darren said. We're not trying to make money on this, but we're trying to get an accurate assessment of the value of that project. And if you don't want to build it out, then we put that money to use for the community.
Okay. Darren, Scott, excuse me.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. All right, I guess I just wanted to take a minute to look at the margins, because if we pass this rule, then it is a I mean, while it is a clear objective standard, it's also a very strict rule. So if someone is, a few feet over or under, meeting one of these definitions, then it's like, oh, sorry, you can't do that. And they're like, no, I really wanted to do the fee in lieu. Unfortunately, it's just a couple feet, uh, under, or whatever. I mean, I'm not sure how people feel about the idea of maybe throwing in, like a 5% flex to be, that could be reviewed by the planning commission. So that way people on the margins could, be all like, oh, it's only just a few feet, and it's so frustrating, bureaucracy. So could we do that, or is that pushing out the clear objective standard too much? I mean, I just feel like if we just give a little bit of wiggle space built in there that could be reviewed by the planning commission, then that could, I guess, not sure how often it would happen, but I think it would be nice to build something like that in. And also, as a chaser to that, do we potentially want to encourage fee in lieu, or do we want to make it like as close to 100% match as possible to the cost of actually building? So that, I mean, because on one end, if like as a community, if we're interested in trying to encourage, the building of sidewalks to schools, to parks, to transportation, we can say, hey, if you choose the fee in lieu route, get a 5% discount over getting it built in your house. I don't know how everyone would feel about that, but I just wanted to bring up a little marginal play to complicate our conversation. Thanks.
Okay, I kind of see that kind of died on the vine. I have a question, and what do we do now with fee in lieu, i.e. going back to Upper Mid Hill, just down the road from me, down the mountain from me? They had a fee in lieu on build out and whatnot on some of the streets coming into the deal. What happens to that money now when somebody like JJ and Darren put in the money for a fee in lieu? What pot does that go into?
So Jim, that's a good question, and I don't actually know the answer to that. I will get an answer, but what I will say is about 5 years ago, we essentially killed off doing fee in lieu. So that was from the city engineers. That was his decision.
I was on the planning commission that we actually were looking when the schoolhouse or the school next to the church down here at the bottom of the hill, there was a school going in, and we gave them an option instead of, so it would stay within what the community looked like, where they could put permeable, I think that is the word I'm looking for, Darren, correct me if I'm wrong, where the water goes through, some kind of a base for a walkway instead of a sidewalk. And so I thought at that time we did a fee in lieu, and I also thought that Upper Mid Hill had a fee in lieu attached to it.
Upper Mid Hill, meaning the Shen Blanc development.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they're building out full streets. The whole infrastructure works.
Yeah. So this is Darren Wise again. Yeah. So Jim, the school was required to do full half-street improvements as part of their approval. Again, we don't have design standards for anything other than the full curb gutter sidewalk. So again, I know there's interest in the community to go to some different design standards, but we've never been directed to go down that pathway by city council. So yeah, the school was required to do the full half-street improvements.
Yeah, I couldn't quite remember. It's been about 5 years. So, okay. Anybody else have a question? If not, I think we can probably take a poll on seeing how people feel about putting forward option 1 or option 2. So let's go ahead and just kind of raise hands and see how many people would like to go with option 1. It kind of like, Tom, you're the only one man out. Do you have well, you're there too. Well, I don't, okay. So option 2. Okay, do we need a formal vote on this, or can we accept it like that, Darren?
Well, I'll speak for Darren. He may correct me. I think that's just fine. I think what we saw was thumbs up all around, and we can move that recommendation to the Planning Commission and to the next step a little bit later this summer. I think July and August.
Is everybody comfortable with that?
So, thank you guys very much. I really appreciate the effort and the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for your work too.
Absolutely.
And thank you for changing those things, because there's a lot of us that don't really understand things like crosswalk and this, what was that other one? And then when you throw in 1,320 feet, why not just say a quarter of a mile?
My apologies. I do my best to dumb down my planner lingo, but every once in a while, it just, too many
Citizens down.
But thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, meeting 7 agenda and logistics. I think that comes up to Darren, and he'd like to. How does everybody feel about taking August off, and come back in September? Or wait a minute, what are we doing? Is it July and then come back in August, Darren?
Yeah, so I posed this question to the group in the email that I'd sent with the materials. So again, council has given this group 3 purposes. One was House Bill 2001, second one being this Chapter 96, and third being a clear and objective standards project, which staff has a consultant team under contract. They're working diligently to make recommendations on data code language. It's going to be a big package again, similar to House Bill 2001. So the consultant is still working through it. We're proposing to cancel the July meeting. Hopefully that coincides with everyone's vacations. And then come back in August and September for the 2 meetings. And then the next question would be, would the group be willing to add 1 additional meeting into October to get through that package? Since it's a large package, that way we could get through half of it in the first meeting, half of it in the second meeting, and then use the third meeting to get to a consensus based on the feedback we've heard in the first 2 meetings. So that's the proposal. First, is everyone okay with canceling July?
Anybody opposed to it? Okay, I guess we're not going to have a meeting in July.
Okay, good. And then is everyone comfortable adding a third meeting in? So then we would go August and September and add a third meeting in October, if needed, to get through the code package. Everyone be okay with that?
I'm gonna go hard no because Chris Myers made fun of my hat. I'm good with it.
We got 1 no and the rest of us are all yes. Okay. Oh, he changed his mind.
Okay.
Hey, Darren,
all right, good. All right, very good. Because yeah, that will also allow us to get the code package out to you instead of 1 week in advance in August. We should be able to get it out to you at least 2 weeks in advance, hopefully even 2.5 or 3 weeks in advance.
I'm going to hold you to that one, Darren.
Time to get through it.
Going to hold your feet to the fire on that one.
Yeah, we'll definitely get it to you more than 1 week in advance because it will be a big package of amendments once again.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions? Do we have any public comments, Lynn?
Public comments at this time.
Well, folks, I thank you all for your time. I think we can adjourn this. And we're not even in an hour into the meeting.
All right. Efficiency.
All right, we'll see you guys in August.